originating from the podcast studio inside FAM 360's headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. This is the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast. The Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast is designed to encourage, equip, and inspire our audience through a combination of inspirational stories and real-life experiences shared by other successful and skilled leaders in a variety of vocations. We hope that the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast empowers each one of us to step out, step up, and ultimately thrive as leaders. Now here's our host, Mr. Matt Maloney.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Matt Maloney. I am truly inspired by today's guest. This is going to be a really exciting episode. This episode is something that we and those of us at the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast had really planned on for a long time, and we wanted to highlight leaders, up-and-coming leaders of the next generation, those that have not yet hit their full stride, but are already doing really special things in their local schools and communities where they live, work, and play. So our guest today, before I introduce her, is a senior at Northview High School, which is located in Johns Creek, Georgia. She is a student ambassador in the Johns Creek Student Leadership Program. She's active in her school and her community. She's the president of 4 clubs, including the president of the advisory board inside the Magnet program. I think it's called 3DE, the TEDx Club, the Psychology Honors Society, and the Kaleidoscope Club. And for someone so young, she has accomplished and is aiming to continue to accomplish so much. She's been on guests or part of 2 TEDx or TED Talks, and I'm just, like I said, I'm inspired by her. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ms. Shruthi Balachander.
Thank you so much for having me here, Mr. Maloney. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
So, I thought we'd start off tell us a little bit about you and your family. Where did you grow up? And of course, we know that you live in Johns Creek, Georgia now, but where did you grow up? And a little bit, again, about your family.
Right. So I was born in the southern part of India in a very metropolitan city called Bangalore. I stayed there for around 3.5 years of my life. And then my dad travels a lot. So we moved to Australia for a year and I stayed in Sydney for a year.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
And then over there, I vividly remember taking swimming and dance classes because I wasn't going to school yet. So I went back to India and then I started preschool, stayed there until about 4th grade. And then after 4th grade, I moved to Alpharetta, and then I went to Northwood Elementary School. And then after 5th grade, I moved to Johns Creek, and then I ended up going to River Trail and now Northview.
Wow. That you've lived in a lot of places.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, even now perhaps, but certainly you'll realize later in life that's going to serve you well in a number of ways from just learning from obviously different cultures, different experiences, and we can learn from those things. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the TED Talks or the TEDx's that you were a part of.
Yeah.
You were a part of 2 of them. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I was in my freshman year when I found out about the program, and I've always been that person that watched these inspirational speeches online. I was like, wow, that's going to be me one day. So on my bucket list,
Love it.
There's this top thing where I actually want to be on the actual TEDx stage and have it recorded. So that's my top thing on my bucket list, to give a speech there one day. So I was like, why not join the club? So I joined it, and then this was COVID year when I was about to give my first speech. So I had a lot of time to think. So I went through about 10 Google documents, and I just search and search. And then I picked on a topic that was actually very heartfelt to me and that I was struggling with. I thought that the only way I could tackle it was tackling my mind. And so I was always someone who had struggled with body positivity and accepting my body for what it was. And I thought that, I read this book about an Indian American author, and she literally flipped my life around. So she talked about how fat is portrayed in such a negative connotation this year. You would say, I'm fat, and everyone's gonna be like, no, you're beautiful. We didn't say you're not beautiful. We just said you're fat. It's an adjective, short, tall, or thin.
Right.
And she talked about how we should flip, and it's just simply an adjective in society. And so I made that the base of my TED Talk. And I took inspiration from her as an author and used the book and my experiences with the book as a kind of intro to the speech.
Sure.
And that was my first speech that actually was a really big deal, because the first time I gave it after COVID in this outdoor setting, it was a church area. And then right after my speech, around 10 people stood up and told me about things that in their lives had negative connotations. But when they realize it now, it means simply nothing. So there was an older woman who said, people say I'm old all the time, like it's a bad thing, or that you're hairy. And it was so inspirational to talk about how my experiences translate into one another's.
That's great.
And so I took that same TED Talk and I gave it again at a more formal event that year. So I gave the same speech twice. And then just this year around April, I gave my second and third TED Talk about how I have this privilege of being able to live life. And it was about how, like you said, I've grown up in so many cultures and societies.
Sure.
And when I go back to India, sometimes right now as a woman, I feel uncomfortable walking down the streets being stared by men everywhere. Or I talked about my mom's aunt who suffered with Alzheimer's, or even just like of never fitting into being too Indian or being too American in both societies and how that translated. But I talked about how regardless of all those experiences and things holding me back, I was grateful enough to experience being able to travel to both countries, being able to make memories with my mom's aunt before those memories were diminished.
Yes.
And talk about how I'm honestly privileged to be an immigrant that gets to travel to America and travel back and forth to India and take all those bad experiences that I thought they were and make this something meaningful, and that I'm just grateful for what I get to live right now. That's
wonderful. You know, it's, and you talked about, you used the word a few times, you know, grateful, right? And we talk about gratitude a lot on this podcast. And if we peer through the lens of gratitude and look at our life that way, we can, I mean, it just changes our whole perspective. Yeah. It changes and it creates a physiological change in our body and our emotions and certainly in our mind, right? Because let's face it, all of us, our minds, right, create this fear, and we're our own worst enemy, and we can get locked up in that. Yeah. And if we can figure out how to break through that, I mean, it's a powerful thing. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Where I'm just real quick, where can the audience find those TEDx's? Is there a location? Do you know? I hate to drop that on you right here, but I just wondered if you knew that. I wish, but sad story. My file was the only file that got corrupted from those TED Talks. Oh no! So it never ended up making it onto YouTube. Okay. But I do have the speeches on my LinkedIn posted. So, okay. Well, good. Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Well, then we're going to definitely, and we'll get that information from you, but we'll definitely put that out there and post that. So that's wonderful. So let's transition. So what kind of led you, you know, as you've gone through this relatively young journey in life so far, but where do you get your passion? What has led you to this journey of saying, I'm really passionate about stepping out, stepping up, and learning more about ultimately becoming a leader? Where did this come from? So I'm writing my college applications right now, and I'm just getting back all my admissions. But a few months ago, like I was deep into that college admission process. And the first question it asks you on there is a personal essay that tells you anything about yourself. So I picked the topic that asks, tell us about a moment that shaped you or some adversity that has translated into your life. So I picked that topic because it was actually about leadership, my entire personal essay. And I talked about how when I grew up in India, I had this vision in my head that if people wanted to see me and if I wanted to be seen, I had to be bossy or I had to be in control of everything. And I needed to take control of every situation that was at hand. But then when I moved to America, I saw that that wasn't true. And I was sacrificing my personality in order to compensate for my lack of being acknowledged by other people. Because I felt that like as a young girl growing up, I wasn't beautiful, I wasn't good enough. And I was like, no, like let's do this by being someone you aren't and making them see you. And so I talked about how that word of like bossy and that connotation, just all of that idea submerged into making me a person who I was, and I wasn't being the leader that I was meant to be. But when I came to middle school, and when I moved to America, that immigration aspect of my life kind of changed me in ways by making me someone who knew that I had to be a leader by putting my personality up first, that I had to be kind and I had to lead with gratitude and humility for people to actually see me, and how that transformed me. And I think a wide part of that is the culture and experiences that I've had in both these countries. India and America are two very different countries in terms of society, community, and standing. And I guess I was just grateful that like I had all these opportunities coming here that I know I had to make more of it, but I could not sacrifice the person I was meant to be. And I knew that leading with humility was the right thing that I had to do, which led me to taking on leadership as a big part of my life. That's wise.
Yeah.
That's wise. So good. That's so good. And it's so true.
Yeah.
And it's kind of in not in all circles, but in some circles, it's countercultural or counterintuitive to say, oh, let's lead with humility. Let's lead from a position from, the bottom up and support it, because, in the minds of so many people, they think that leadership is about control and eliciting that control. And it's not about that at all.
Right, for sure.
It is the opposite of that.
Exactly. I had someone say to me, I'm a better leader than you because I know how to be more dominant and delegate people more than you. I was like, well, that's not what leadership even is about to me.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah, that's great. So I think, again, I know the answer to this, but I'd like to, what do you think are the most important attributes of successful leaders that you perhaps yourself deem successful out there, whether it's in the workplace or, education or in the nonprofit sector or what do you think are the most important, attributes or character traits, if you will, of a great leader?
For sure. When I think of leaders, the first thing that comes to my mind is my teachers. And they are the biggest leaders, and I think they've shaped my form and view of education and life a lot, which actually influenced my research study for my class that I was telling you about. But I think in terms of leadership, the most important quality to have is being able to learn from your mistakes, persevering, which we might not all do sometimes, being true to your personality, and being culturally agile, making sure that wherever you go, you are changing your persona based on the people you're talking to. And that you are doing the right thing when you're in that community or that society or that country. Because I feel like when I look at America as a whole, and it's such a melting pot of cultures, we often forget that when we go to different people or talk to different societies or communities, that there are different ways to approach methods based on what historically has happened. That's right. Just like that demographic of that community. And I think being culturally agile is a very strong leadership characteristic to have, because you know when to turn your switch on, turn your switch off, and exactly what to portray out there.
Yeah, that is a self-awareness skill, right?
For
you need to be self-aware, and then because of that self-awareness, you can become culturally agile and how you communicate. And there's verbal and nonverbal communication.
Exactly.
And that's different in different cultures.
Right.
And over time, you learn that, and sometimes people are offended.
Yeah.
And you don't mean to be, the other person or yourself, you're not meaning to be offensive, but then you're not aware of, wait a minute, that's how they're receiving it. And we talk about this a lot in our business. Yeah. We put together character profiles on all of our leadership team, right?
Right.
And one of the aspects of that is understanding how each of us likes to communicate and how each of us likes to be communicated to.
Yeah, it's like a love language.
It's like a love language. Yeah, no doubt about it. That's great. How do you think leadership translates in different cultures, societies, and systems? We were talking about that. This is kind of a good, kind of segue from that, and maybe speak to that question from your own personal experiences.
Right. So when I moved to America, I got very much into K-pop music and Korean dramas. And I think leadership translates very differently in different demographics and societies because of just historically, like what I said, they've undergone, and just like the respect and values in those cultures, values and morals. So in Korean culture, it is like basic respect that you bow down to someone, or like that you nod your head, because that's like your first form of I respect you. In the Indian culture, it might be shaking hands or just acknowledging someone. But when I moved to America, I would walk down the street and random people would smile at me. I was like, wait, people don't do this in India. Like, no one smiles at me randomly. But I was like, no, that's a form of like, hey, I exist. You are here in America, and like, nice to meet you. But it's just like
it's like an acknowledgement. It's a nonverbal acknowledgement, so to speak. Yeah.
But in different societies and translations, like the idea of leadership is the same, right? But it is translated different, like a language, right? When I'm talking to my grandmom and I want to translate something from my ethnic language, which is Telugu or Tamil, to English, I can't find the exact words, because those words simply don't exist in English, right? Those ideas don't exist. And I have to, like, if I have to explain an Indian food, I have to give you a long, lengthy paragraph about what it means in the American society. When leadership is a similar thing, like, and the translation of it is similar. The ideas are same, but you will never have the perfect words to talk about how in a different culture that equivalates there.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of beautiful in a way, because you learn so much more when you explore. And when you're when you're actually open to all those, and when you experience yourself in those different societies and cultures, you find yourself as a more dynamic and multifaceted person than you originally were, rather than living or being in one area or one sector of your life.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Question. So every person has to kind of refuel their tank, right? There's things that we all do, and whether it's, in the spiritual realm or meditation or it's books that we read. And I always talk about, even with my own children, about, what are we feeding our minds with, right? Much like we feed our body, we want to feed our body with healthy food so that our body it performs well and whatnot. But how are we feeding our minds? And so I'm just curious for you, like, with your quest to become, a great leader and your thirst for knowledge, what do you do in your spare time to feed your mind and in this, realm of leadership?
Yeah, for sure. I love the world of business. I applied to be a business major, and I think I love business because it's so dynamic and there's so many sectors to it, and you could do virtually anything. But at the end of the day, you're making impact through a lens that like focuses on capitalism, or that focuses on finance or design or coding. But I feed my mind through opportunity and experience, right? And opportunity for me looks different in every way, but it's about saying like, oh, is there a service project that's like nearby this weekend? Oh, let's go do it, right? Like, is there an internship that I will probably most likely not get, but you know what? Let's apply to it.
Let's try it.
Yeah, let's try it. It's about, there's not one thing. Like, I don't sit and meditate, or I don't like aversively listen to like a lot of podcasts or speeches. Sure. But it's more about like, I'm not going to give up anything I'm not going to give up on anything life offers me.
Yeah.
So
That's great.
over the past 4 years, I've actually made that my motto. And through a person I met, Mr. Jeffrey Specker, he's the CEO of the Intercontinental Exchange and the New York Stock Exchange. Yeah. And I got to interview him for the 3D Magnet program. It was a Junior Achievement Business Hall of Fame. It was like a red carpet fancy event. But like, his one word stuck out to me, and I made my speech and introduction about him. And he says that success is something for him that comes from within, and it's not extrinsic, but it's intrinsic. Yes. So things like that, and saying yes to every opportunity in my life, has given me and feeded my brain, because I wouldn't be the person I am without listening to people, or without having those 3 different internships that have nothing to do with each other, or without talking to people from different cultures. So there's not one thing, but it's just the idea of opportunity and experience.
Yeah. And oftentimes people talk about in business particularly, but taking risks, right? And so, but peeling that back a little bit deeper, just taking one step forward and saying, hey, I may not be able to get that internship. I may not qualify for that, but I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to see if I can gain experience from it. Exactly. And that's how we learn, and we never stop learning. Right. Our capacity to learn really never stops until the day that we die, right? Yeah. And I think that's the difference for really, really great, successful leaders. Someone once told me, and who was coaching me, once said that one of the greatest attributes that they felt really successful leaders had is their thirst for knowledge and their curiosity to want to know and learn more. Yeah. Right. And so the more that we're curious, the more that we want to understand and take that opportunity, sometimes a risk, to go out and learn from that opportunity or that particular situation. So that's great. I commend you on that. That's a wonderful approach. So let's talk about, because I think it's no secret that we're in a competitive world, and America is a competitive society. And sometimes we can get lost in that a little bit. But I mean, I think for you, how does competition define, in your opinion, leadership ability? Right. In my AP literature class, we do writing prompts every morning. And one of the prompts was competition or cooperation. And I thought that was really interesting, because Northview in general and the college world right now is highly competitive, right? Yeah. You're competing with your best friend to get a spot at a college you want to go to. And I mean, in the way, people sacrifice a lot of things for that. But I think if we focus so much on competition, then we lose ourselves in cooperation, right? Like, we always hear like, too many hands spoil the broth. Yeah. Or, but we also hear that like more hands make merrier, or things like that. But in my world, I guess competition has almost like led me these 4 years to be like, oh, like I have to make it. But I think what set me apart is the idea that like you can exist in both of those worlds. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, right? Like, I can
compete for things that I need to be competing for, like, I don't know, like a leadership position. But I can also be cooperating with my leadership team when I get that position.
Of course.
Right. And I think even with things that I'm doing right now. So for right now, like just yesterday, we are raising money for the Grady Foundation because we recognized it as it's the only emergency one and trauma center in Atlanta. And we saw a great need for it. And so we're fundraising money through a boba tea fundraiser. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so there are two ways for me to look at it. And because this is through the Psychology Honor Society, there are two ways to look at it. It's either that like I have to compete and make more money than the last president did last year, or I work with my team and I focus more on making impact than the idea of money, right?
Yes.
So it was like, yes, let's choose impact. Let's talk more to Grady and talk about what we can do to them rather than this idea of just like, I need to make more.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think in a world like this, like there has to always be a balance. Like I'm not saying that you have to only cooperate 100% of the time. Like
sure,
maybe you won't get what you want there, but in a world like they both can exist at the same time unless you know who you are and what you want from it.
Wisdom. That's wisdom, guys, right there. And I want to come back to this for just 1 second. You talked about, focusing on the impact. Let's not focus on just about raising the money and whatnot. Let's focus on the impact that we can have.
Yeah.
And that really is that concept that you just talked about, that statement is really what separates successful organizations where they focus on, what are we doing and why are we doing it?
Right.
The money, or if that's one of the goals, that comes after it comes. You focus on the impact and why we're doing it, and that's what gets everybody, and that's really what propels great organizations to be even greater.
Right.
You've really done such an amazing job, and there's so many amazing things to date. I'm so excited to follow your journey. I'd like to hear from you one last thing, and then I'm going to ask you a couple of fun questions. What do you, of all the things that you've experienced so far, what are you most proud of in your journey thus far?
Right. I've noticed I always start off everything with like a tiny story, but
that's okay.
So I've started flying to colleges, like I said, because it's been like the senioritis thing. Yeah. But I got this letter one day from a couple colleges that was like, congrats on being a first generation student. And I was like, wow. I was like, I didn't realize I'm one because my parents went to college. They have master's degrees and they're amazing. But I am the first in my family to go to college in the United States, which is in a way very different. Wow. And I didn't realize it was a big deal. And the reason it's a big deal is not because like I had to struggle majorly, but it's because like I came here and I figured out everything by myself. Like I figured out how school works because it's so different. And I figured out how clubs work and how to fit into an American society. I figured that on my own because that was probably the hardest thing. It's like changing my accent, just changing the way I am because like who I was in India didn't translate to who I was in America. And that played into a lot of my experiences as a young child who didn't know how to fit in. So I guess you could say I'm most proud of like figuring it out by myself and being the first, or to even like lead away from my brother to like, hey, I know this now, so I can tell you this, right? Yeah. Like when to take your SAT or like when to do that exact thing. And like, I'm proud that I figured out life in a completely new country by myself and I made the most out of it.
That's great.
So I think that's the most, I'm proud of it.
That's something really to be proud of.
Yeah.
High five on that. That's great. Well, listen, we've reached the end of our episode.
That makes me kind of sad.
I know. We get so much, we could still talk. There's so much more to talk about. But I would say that you have been a true inspiration to me. I know you've been an inspiration to our guest audience. There's so many things that I know you're going to accomplish. I mean, with the things, and it's one is your desire, right? And that's it. But your heart's in the right place. And I just want to affirm you on that. And just, I thank God that he's put that on your heart and that you are going to lead a great life and you're going to have plenty of opportunities. So
thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah. Congratulations on that.
Much.
I want to finish with a quote from Richard Branson. It says, "The future needs passionate, happy, confident young leaders, willing to challenge the status quo and stand up for their convictions." That's from Richard Branson. To all of our subscribers and listeners out in podcast land, I hope today's episode was both empowering and inspirational. I pray that our daily journeys are filled with opportunities to lift others up as we aim to go above and beyond. Thanks, everyone.
Our executive producer and host is Matt Maloney, President and CEO of FAM360. Strategic Communication Coordinator, Michelle Ducato. Production assistance by Tin Dog Studios. Director, John Berland. Creative Assistant, Whitney Berland. Theme song, Connecting Dots by Curtis Cole, provided by Artlist. Please subscribe today and don't miss any of our weekly episodes.